Jason asked me, hey Murph, when I buy a property with both well and septic, should I expect to pay for having them inspected by a professional? Now this is a great question because most of the time in the Minneapolis area where I'm usually working in the 7-county metro area, there's not a lot of well and septic unless you start getting a little bit more rural. Now, when I talk about rural, what are we talking about? We're talking about either lake property or we're talking about maybe acreage. So if you're buying a lake property or you're buying on acreage that's a little bit more rural, you're gonna run into your property or the property that you're looking at buying having a well system and potentially a septic system. So who pays for that? Great question. Usually we have the seller pay for that. The reason why we have the seller pay for that is because it's the seller's system, and as a buyer and your buyer's agent, I would expect that the seller wants to keep their system compliant and running up to par. You know, you're not going to want to let a well or a septic system, become run down, because obviously there's a lot of issues that can go that can happen with that. So yes, we would ask that the seller pay to have a licensed professional come out and do a well and septic inspection. Now, what's included in a well and septic inspection? So usually if you're doing a well inspection, you can inspect the actual well, because when you have a well, you drill a well, and it can be 50 feet down, 100 feet down, hundreds of feet down, just depends what it takes to get to the well. And then there's a shaft, just like if you're drilling for oil, you have a shaft so that the water can be pumped out. Well, you can have a guy go down there with a scope and he can inspect that shaft to make sure it's functioning. But the biggest thing you really want to focus on, because usually the shaft is going to be fine as far as the well that's been drilled. So it just depends how old it is if you really want to inspect that. But the thing that you always want to inspect is the water quality. So you can get a water quality test, and that will let you know as far as the bacteria and if the water is drinkable and is obviously healthy. Now, what's included in a septic system inspection? This, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because it can get intricate, because a septic system with a drainage field and all the different things that go with it can get complicated. But basically you're wanting to make sure that the system is working properly. If you have a drainage field, that the drainage field is set up properly and that it's up to code and up to par, because you don't want to have any issues with the city or environmentals. The other thing is that if you have a holding tank, you want to make sure that it's not leaking. You want to make sure that they've pumped it out and it isn't full to the top. So just things like that. And you want to make sure that both with the well and septic that you have someone that actually installs wells or builds a septic system. You don't want just anybody showing up and doing those inspections. So you definitely want to make sure that the seller is using someone that's qualified to do those home inspections or those well and septic inspections. So that's a little bit more about, yes, if you have a well and septic system on the property you're going to buy, the seller pays for it, and a little bit more about what you should be looking out for. So if you have questions, hit me up below. I'm here to help.